Hello, Michael Robotham. How long has it been since we've seen each other?
I was trying to work that out. I can't actually remember when I came to the store to Poison Pen, what book I was promoting, but it's a long while. It's probably maybe 7, 8 years.
Oh, I think at least that long. You haven't been to the States for quite a while.
No, I haven't. I mean, I think I came to BoucherCon when it was in North Carolina, in Raleigh. Sorry, it was in Raleigh, and that again is probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and I don't think I didn't get to Arizona then, so I didn't get to see you. Just sort
Well,
of
I always miss you. And, for years I thought you were a British author. I had no idea that you'd moved back to Australia in 1996. But I'm gonna try because I have this green screen behind me. It's really hard to hold up a book that it will show, but I'm gonna try. How do I do this? There we go. So there is a copy of your new book, which When She Was Gone, good, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your interesting path to becoming an author, because you really started out as a newspaper man. Why did you quit the Daily Mail and decide to go freelance?
I guess, I mean, I wanted to write from, be a novelist from about the age of 11. And I grew up in very small country towns in Australia. And I felt as though, I mean, I can tell you a story. It's a wonderful story. It involves, I fell in love with the works of Ray Bradbury. And I read everything I get my hands on of Ray Bradbury. And obviously, Fahrenheit 451 and his famous novels, but all his short story collections. And there were about 4 books you couldn't get in Australia, Bradbury titles. And I wrote him a letter, and all I addressed it to was Ray Bradbury, Random House, New York. And I don't recall putting a stamp on the envelope. I was only 11 at the time. And I popped that in the postbox in this little country town. And about 3 months later, I came home from school, and there was a package on the kitchen table, and inside were the 4 Ray Bradbury titles that weren't available in Australia, along with a letter from Bradbury himself saying how thrilled he was to have this young reader on the far side of the world. But the story gets better because about 6 years ago, I wrote that story up for an American magazine. It was republished on my US publishing website. And I quoted Bradbury, who once said that Jules Verne was his literary father, and Mary Shelley was his literary mother, and Edgar Allan Poe was the bat-winged cousin they kept locked in the attic. And I said that Ray Bradbury was my literary father, and that Steinbeck and Hemingway were my overachieving older brothers. And I told the story of writing to Bradbury, and about a week passed, the story was published, and I got an email from Alexandra Bradbury, who was Ray's youngest daughter. I had no idea that Ray Bradbury was still alive. And she wrote to me and she said, "My father is now 91 years old and completely blind. But I read him the story that you wrote, and I wanted you to know that you made an old man cry. And he wanted you to know that you are his son." And after that, I began corresponding through Alexandra with Ray, and I sent him all my audiobooks so he could listen to them. And the plan was when I next got to America, that when I got to LA, I would go and have dinner or lunch with the family. And I was so excited because he was really my great literary hero. And he died several weeks before I got to the States. And there was the most astonishing outpouring of stories and people like Steven Spielberg and Neil Gaiman, and all of these people wrote about how Bradbury was their inspiration, and how he had generosity as a writer. And I guess the little post-it sort of note to all of that was that after all that publicity, President Obama then announced that the Mars rover Curiosity had just landed on Mars, and one of Ray's most famous collections of short stories is the Martian Chronicles, and he would have loved the whole idea of Curiosity, the Martian rover. And President Obama announced that the landing spot of Curiosity would forever be known as Bradbury's Landing, which I thought was such a lovely gesture to a man, who was one of the greats of American literature. But I mean, Bradbury was my inspiration to want to be a writer. Journalism was my way to gather material because I'd grown up in tiny country towns and felt as though I had nothing to write about. So I started in newspapers in Australia. I started with a wonderful writer called Geraldine Brooks. We were cadets together, and she went on to win a Pulitzer Prize for writing March, and she's a wonderful novelist. then I moved to London to work on Fleet Street, and I worked on the Mail on Sunday for many years. And then I became a ghostwriter of the celebrity autobiographies, and then I became a novelist.
I was really interested to see that you had penned something like 15 ghost-written autobiographical novels. Now, what did that teach you, Michael, because that was before you really wrote your first book, which was such a sensation, The Suspect, your first Joe O'Loughlin, but you must have learned something writing autobiographies that helped you.
No, it did. I mean, the thing is, even though I'd wanted to be a novelist since I was very young, journalism is a captivating profession. You do so many. I covered events of the Berlin Wall coming down and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And, I was traveling the world as a journalist. And so my thoughts of being a novelist sort of disappeared further and further into the background. But ghostwriting taught me to write long form, because I've been writing most newspaper stories of, is the feature writer, even 1,000 words, it's sort of a regular feature. So suddenly did I have the patience to sit and spend a year or longer writing 100,000 words? But the main thing ghostwriting taught me, because ghostwriting, it's all about capturing someone's voice. So, I ghostwrote people like, Lulu, the 60s pop star Lulu, best known for To Sir With Love, and Jerry Halliwell of the Spice Girls, and I did soldiers and politicians, and each of them have a unique voice. And if you're ghostwriting their autobiography, you're doing it in their voice, it's first person from their point of view. And you have to capture their voice so perfectly that someone that's known them their entire lives won't recognize your ghostwriter fingerprints on that. It just looks and sounds and feels like them. And I guess it taught me about capturing voice. So when I came to writing fiction, I tried to create characters that lived and breathed and just lifted off the page. And to me, when I began writing them, they felt like real people, just like those people that I ghostwrote for.
Well, obviously, it worked out extremely well for you. There was a big bidding war for The Suspect in 2002, and then in 2004 it published and did really well. You've been nominated for all kinds of awards, but I bet the most fun one for you was when you won the Gold Dagger and beat out Stephen King for Life or Death in 2015. I love the headline in the paper that said, "Robotham beats King."
That was funny. Well, it's funny that the breaking news overnight is of just Good Girl, Bad Girl, which is the book before When She Was Good, has just been shortlisted for the Gold Dagger in the UK overnight. So I'm not saying I'm going to win. Apparently there's only 2 writers that have ever won it twice, and they are John le Carre and Ruth Rendell. So it would be a huge achievement if I could win another one. No, it wasn't just Stephen King on the shortlist that year. It was Robert Galbraith, or J.K. Rowling was on the shortlist as well. And she was actually in the room that night, and it's quite a funny story, because I had no idea she was there. I just thought there's no way Jo Rowling is turning up. I mean, she's just so huge, she's turning up at this. And so it was a sort of a big event in London. And after I came off stage, I was, people wanted to talk to me and congratulate me having won. And someone grabbed my arm and said, "Jo wants to meet you," and started dragging me through the crowd. And I was stopping to thank people and to talk to people, and they were very insistent. "Jo wants to meet you. Jo wants to." And finally, I got really annoyed, and I turned around and I said, "Who the is Jo?" Just as the crowds parted, and there was J.K. Rowling in front of me, and I had to be very apologetic and say, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." But she was, she tweeted her congratulations after that. I think she's got, I can't remember, 14 million followers on Twitter or something. But it was the most responses I've ever had to a post, because she tweeted about it, which was lovely.
She really values her crime writing. I have a long story which I won't take up, but I will tell you another time about her first Galbraith book. Well, I will tell you really quickly. I read it in an advanced reading copy from her U.S. publisher, and I liked it. We have a British crime club. And so I wrote and said, because I know the editor of Mulholland really well, and I wrote and said, "Josh, do you think this is a pseudonym?
Josh
Do
was
you
my
think?"
Yep.
Yes, he's wonderful. And I said, so it's a pseudonym, but do you think if this person's living in the US that we could get some books signed? And after a while, he wrote back and he said, "Well, we've taken this one from our UK publisher, and I don't know who it is. And we've done quite a small print run." And I said, so what you're basically saying is if I ask the UK publisher if they can get copies signed for me through our partner in London, you'll be okay with that? He said, yeah, sure. So I wrote to a bookstore in London that we share things with and told them I'd really like to have this. And they said, well, how many would you take? And I thought, well, if I'm going to go to all this trouble, I'll think big. So I said, I'd be happy to have 80 to 100. And they said, well, if you really like it, we'll see if we can get some too. And then maybe that will be worthwhile. So they wrote to Little Brown and they asked, and she went in and signed them all and sent them to us. And what she said was she was so excited that somebody, because she was completely anonymous, right?
Yeah. Oh, no,
was,
I share publishers with her in the UK and the US, and I was sent an advance reading copy in the hope that I might blurb on it, and I didn't get a chance to actually read it until before it all sort of came out. But only 3 people anywhere in the world in the publishing houses knew who Robert Galbraith was, and that was a lawyer that wrote up the contract, and the CEO of Little Brown, and the editor. And I remember, it's funny you should say that, because there was a well-known bookshop in London that wanted signed copies, and they refused to take any unless they knew exactly who it was. And then when they discovered who it was, kicked themselves, because it's a very rare thing to find signed copies going back that far.
well, it really is. In any case, we got our signed copies and a very nice note that said she was so pleased that somebody, especially in America, had read her her first crime novel and really liked it. And she has continued to send a couple over the years to that store and thus to us. But the funny part was that I sold them and nobody paid a whole lot of attention. And then, of course, when the lawyer's wife, managed to uncover her identity, they went like a shot. And, and it was, once again, people said to me, as they have for 31 years, how did you know? I mean, it's like I have magical powers or something, or somehow I knew that, Mark Graney would turn into a #1 bestseller, or Michael Howard, all these authors. And, the bottom line is that if I like their writing, I'm happy to support them. And it doesn't really matter to me whether anybody knows who they are or not. It's all about the book. But over the years, that has truly paid off. It's been amazing.
Well, I mean, you are so well read in this genre, and what you do is you recognize, and you, I mean, you're one of the great supporters of new writers as well, and you recognize, the talent coming through, which is brilliant.
Well, I love your books. I know that Anna, who's going to join us in a few minutes, like I, is crazy about The Night Fairy. And she wants to talk to you about When She Was Good, too. But you were nominated last year for an Edgar. Tell me a little bit about last year's book, because Scribner's now your publisher here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think, and that's partly because, I was with Mulholland for many years. And I think, to a degree, I think I'm at Scribner because of Stephen King. He has been such a huge supporter of my work ever since I wrote Shatter, my 4th novel, and he called it one of his books of the year. And I mean, I'd never met him. I got to get published by him, but ever since then, he reads every one of my books and tweets about it. And I think he must have just bent Scribner's ear to such a degree where he said, you have to publish this guy. And eventually they came to me and made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. So I mean, but I know, I mean, talking about Good Girl, Bad Girl, it's the book that precedes When She Was Good. I mean, they can be read as standalones, but it's the book that introduces Cyrus Haven, a new psychologist, into a new series. A psychologist with a tragic backstory, and a troubled teenager, Evie Cormack, and that's where they first meet in Good Girl, Bad Girl. And you learn a lot in that book. Evie is this troubled teen. She's actually, the story is that when she was a very small child, she was found hiding in a room in a house in a false or secret room in a house where a man was tortured to death, and no one realized this child was hiding in the walls. And when they find her, she refuses to reveal her name or her age, and the courts give her the name, Evie Cormack. And the story begins 6 years later when Cyrus Haven, a psychologist, sent into a children's home to interview her and decide if she's ready to be released into the world, because she claims to be 18 now. and you learn a lot in Good Girl, Bad Girl about who Evie is, but some of the big question marks is what she was doing in that room aren't answered in that book. And it's not until you read When She Was Good that you get more of the pieces of her story come together.
That's lovely. I see that Anna is coming to join us now. So hang on a minute while we,
Okay.
I love the Zoom technology. It's really interesting. There she is.
Hello.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Well, I am fine, but I would like you to meet
Fantastic.
Michael Robotham. You
Oh
fan.
my
Anna.
gosh. Wow, what an honor. It's so lovely to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too, fellow Australian writer, and congratulations on the book. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a ridiculous kind of miracle. I don't know how it's happened, but it has, and it's brilliant, and I'm really enjoying it. Yeah. Are you in Sydney?
I am. Yeah.
Wow.
You're Central Coast, aren't you? Yeah.
Central Coast, yeah, so not far away at all. How are you coping over there? All right?
I'm fine. I mean, I don't know what you find about lockdown. I mean, you've got young children, but my wife looks at me during this whole sort of pandemic and she says, it hasn't changed for you, has it? Your life hasn't changed one bit. You've been self-isolating for 27 years and you just go and keep doing it.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, the book industry has been preparing for self-isolation for a very long time. A lot of writers have. How are you, Barbara? Are you okay?
Very well, thank you. Unfortunately, the poison pen has always been, to a great degree, an internet, or before that, actually the old-fashioned way. We used to mail out paper newsletters with order forms and people sent checks or faxed us things. So we've always been set up for this time, but I'm sad that it has become necessary rather than optional. I would have liked it better if we could have continued that way. So Anna, when you and I did an event for your lovely book, The Safe Place, we were talking about authors that you liked, and Michael was right there at the top of your list.
Oh, absolutely.
So I offered to introduce you, and I thought that we might go back and talk a moment, or you would talk a moment about The Night Fairy, which still remains, of all Michael's novels, my very favorite.
It's my wife's favorite book of mine as well. It's always remained her favorite book that I've written as well.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, no, I've been a big fan for a long time. My favorite personally is The Secret She Keeps. I was really blown away by that, and I'm kind of torn as to whether or not I want to watch the TV thing, because I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's gonna, you know that you get kind of nervous if because you don't want to, like, almost what you experience with a novel gets, it's like your own memories. So I'm like, I don't know if it wants to, if I want it to monkey with my memories.
It's the thing, Barbara knows, The Secret She Keeps has just been made into a 6-part TV series, which has just been shown on the BBC,
yeah,
the UK, and it's available in America. It's streaming on the streaming platform Sundance Now, which is one of the streaming platforms in America. I don't know much about them. It's not as big as Netflix, but it's one of those streaming platforms. They're showing it now in America, but it stars. They've taken the book was set in the UK. It tells the story of two women, both of whom are pregnant and both of whom are having their babies at the same time, and their lives sort of collide in the most sort of dramatic of ways. And but when they filmed the TV series, they've moved it to Australia, and but the lead actress is Laura Carmichael, who is best known as Lady Edith in Downton Abbey.
Yeah,
plays one of the lead characters, and it's and when it showed on the BBC about 4 weeks ago, it was the first Australian drama to ever premiere on BBC One primetime in BBC history. And
that's so interesting.
And I got 3.5 million viewers on the first night, which in the UK in this day and age is a huge number. In
That's
America,
massive.
it's a huge number.
Oh, well done. That's great. Yeah, Laura Carmichael's a great actress. Was there a reason? Is it because it's an Australian production company? Is that why the action's been moved to Australia?
Yeah, look, I had an option. There were two offers. One was the British company who made Wolf Hall, and they were looking to turn it into a series. And I think ever since Big Little Lies became such a big international hit, production companies around the world have been looking for dramas that involve very strong female characters, really strong female characters. And and then I had this Australian, and the one advantage of going with an Australian company is that I've had stuff made into films before. Like in Germany, I've had 6 books made into films.
Okay.
But I've never had any involvement because it's all in German language, and whereas by filming it in Australia, I had an opportunity to go into the writer's room and to go on set and actually I didn't know whether I was going to enjoy that process or what.
Yeah.
Whereas if it had been in the UK, I would have flown across because I did get my Stan Lee Alfred Hitchcock cameo in The Secret She Keeps.
Really? What scene were you in?
I'm in episode 4. I joke. I was doing a radio interview in Australia, and I jokingly said that to the interviewer, because I knew the series had been commissioned. I said, "Oh, I'm hoping I get a little walk-on part." I said, I want to be man doing crossword in cafe." The producer of the whole show was in her car listening to the radio interview, and she phoned me as soon as they got off air and said, "There's a cafe scene we're filming in about 5 weeks. Would you like to be?"
My God, that is so good.
And so I can't believe, it was 7 hours hanging around to film my scene. The crossword was well and truly done by the time.
Yes, well and truly done. That's brilliant. Yeah, I used to be an actress myself, actually. So I've done a lot of hanging around on set, so I know what that's like. But
you don't
brilliant.
know that Anna actually had a role in DL and Pasco in that
really?
wonderful series. Yep, for Red Shell. So I remembered her from that because I really loved those. I loved the TV from it. Now Australia, I have to tell you, not only is doing some really good TV, which we see here in the States on Acorn as a big platform. I love The Heart Guy, for example, which I think is very good, but lots of Australian crime drama has come here. And there's been a burst of Australian crime writing. I've been saying for the last year or two that I think that Australian crime wave is going to replace the Scandinavian crime wave. We pretty much milked Scandi Noir, and I think that lots of great writing is coming in from Australia, and with Zoom and so forth, in this pandemic age, it's a lot easier to do things with writers at a distance than it was even 6 months ago.
I think what's changed, Barbara, you go back 20 or 30 years, and American crime readers would read American crime fiction, and the British would read British crime fiction. And there was very few readers read writers that were writing in locations that weren't their own. And the whole Scandi Noir thing sort of helped break people out of that. And people are quite happy to read a book set in any country as long as it's got compelling characters and a great story. But it was only probably 10 years ago that I had a publisher tell me, a UK publisher tell me, not my publisher, but another publisher, who was trying to poach me away. And because I often get asked, why haven't I set a book in Australia? And I had a publisher say to me that they would be happy for me to write a book set anywhere in the world other than Australia.
Oh, why?
And I said, why? And they said, because no Australian crime novel, unless you want to go all the way back to the Boney books, the Upfield books of the 50s, no Australian crime novel had ever been a big international success. And I remember saying to this person, yes, that is only until one of them is. And of course, Jane Harper and The Dry became such a massive international hit that I think that's what's opened the doors to, there are now so many brilliant new Australian crime writers that are coming through. And I think it made people just realise that, publishers and other people realise that there's a hunger out there for people to read stories that are set in locations that are different from their own. And Australia is a very different place.
Absolutely. Why, Michael, why do you set most of your books in London in the UK? I have to say, I've just finished When She Was Good, and I'm from the north of England myself, so I really enjoyed all the settings and the references to Meadowhall. I grew up in Sheffield, so very cool. And I studied in Manchester. I lived in Fallowfield and Withington for 3 years. So,
what happened was, I was, as I mentioned to Barbara, earlier, I was born and bred in Australia, but I worked on Fleet Street. I lived in the UK for 12 years. And it was when I was in the UK I wrote what, I wrote, and I'm sure many people would regard as the greatest ever unpublished Australian novel. And, and of course, I tried to get it published in the UK, and I missed out by a single vote in a publishing meeting. Because the book was set in Australia, in a little fishing town in Australia. And I was told afterwards, when Penguin Heinemann were looking at publishing it, they said, if you had set that book in England, Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, we would have published it in a heartbeat. But because you've set it in Australia, it's a little bit too hard for us to sell, to launch it. I'm telling you, this is going back to 1985. This is many, many years ago.
Right.
And that was in the back of my mind. When I sat down to write The Suspect in about 2000, in the back of my mind, was that rejection. And I thought, okay, I'm a ghostwriter at the moment. I mean, I've got a wife and a mortgage and kids. I mean, I can't afford to live off oranges in a freezing garret. I have to try to write something that can make me some money. So I wrote the first 117 pages of The Suspect, and I set it in the UK, and that triggered a bidding war at the London Book Fair in 2002, and in 3 hours sold into 22 translations.
Oh, amazing.
And so that's the reason. And now people often ask me, and I've got publishers falling over themselves saying, will you take that book out of your bottom drawer, the Australian book out? And a little part of me thinks, while it stays in the bottom drawer, it will always be the greatest ever unpublished. The moment I take it out, that'll just...
Yeah.
Well, Anna, you too, because The Safe Place, although you are in Australia because you married an Australian, but you're British by birth, but
Yeah.
The Safe Place begins in London and then winds up in the Atlantic coast of France.
Yeah.
And Michael, who is Australian by birth, and is writing his book set in the UK. So, you guys are not doing it sure.
You have Jane Harper, who was born in the UK and moved to Australia, who's studying her books in Australia. And it's all
Well,
over.
that's true. And, looking back over time, Peter Temple, for example, everybody kind of tried to break him out as from Australia. Peter Corris, written forever. I'm not sure. Is he still with us? I mean,
No, he died about 18 months ago.
Okay, I thought that I remembered that.
Peter Temple passed away a bit before that. It was very sad. We lost Peter Temple as well.
Right. But historical crime in Australia has done fairly well. I mean, Carrie Greenwood's Miss Fisher Mysteries and Corinna Chapman, which we have published for years, and Sulari Gentle, who I think is making quite a lot of strides. She won the Ned Kelly Award for Best Crime Novel for she called it Crossing the Lines in this country. Now it's called after she wrote him. So, we're seeing more coming from Australia, but maybe the historicals are easier to sell to a foreign audience than let's say an urban noir.
Yeah, I think, I suppose Jane Harper in The Dry, it sort of created this sort of bush noir or outback noir, that sort of small isolating. I mean, it does for a foreigner if you went to a small Australian town in the outback. It is like a different planet, and it's a bit like when you see books set in the wilds of the frozen north. There's an isolation and a harshness to the environment, which I think adds to the sense of location and suspense. And a lot of the writers that are breaking through have gone for those rural and isolated settings in Australia. But I mean, there's always been, I think it's just a way of, and across all the different sort of branches of the crime genre, there is just a real resurgence. And I mean, I used to have one ambition, and that it'd be interesting to know, when I first began writing, the top selling crime writers in Australia were all foreigners. I mean, Michael Connolly, Lee Child. I mean, they just dominated our bestseller lists here. There was no Australian writer that got within cooey of selling the numbers they did. And I remember saying to publishers that my ambition was to see, at some point, whether it be me or someone else, I wanted to see Australian crime writers getting to number one. I wanted to see Australian crime. I wanted to see Australians embrace their own writers.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see those writers take the world on.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it does seem to be happening, that there's some absolutely incredible Australian crime writing coming out. And I do agree that, you know, certainly for the past kind of couple of years, it's been very much centered in, as you say, that very harsh, wild, isolated environment of the outback and those small kind of sinister towns. I think there's more of a push now for kind of urban crime. But honestly, I mean, the second book that I'm writing now, that I'm kind of just coming to the end of now, I'm writing the first draft at the moment, and half of it is set in Sydney, in Bondi, and half of it is set in the UK, in Bristol, and that's purely because that's how it came out. That's how it felt right. That's, you know, that I needed certain things from my setting. I needed certain things from my characters. At no point was I thinking, okay, what's going to sell? How am I going to make this? But I think that, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting. Barbara mentioned earlier a book, Life or Death, which won the Gold Egg, and that's set in Texas. The only time I've set a book outside of the UK was I set a book in Texas, which, and I didn't make it, that wasn't, people think, oh, you're trying to capture an American market or whatever. And the reason I sat there, I knew this was a book about a man who escapes from prison the day before he's due to be released. And the thing was that it was actually a UK publisher that said to me, when I told them the idea behind the story, they said, well, America has an incredible tradition of prison-based or books like, you know, Shawshank Redemption or The Green Mile or Brubaker. I mean, they have almost this subgenre of prison-based books that have that story. And also the small-town politics of directly elected sort of sheriffs and DAs and all, where there's so much nepotism. I needed certain aspects for the novel story to work. And it was logical for me to choose to set it in America. Initially, I set it in Arkansas. And eventually I settled on Texas. But yeah, I've never made a decision on to write based upon, I think there's a bigger market, because I think one of the things that Life or Death did for me, apart from, you know, the winning the awards, was that my publishers, and publishers always are, incredibly nervous when you go away from a formula or you know, a series to write a standalone. They get very nervous, you know, they sort of smile with this thick smile, and behind the eyes, you know, they're thinking, how much is this going to cost us? You know, how many sales are we going to lose here? But because that book was so successful, I proved to myself and my publishers that my readers would come with me. It didn't matter where I set the book, that I could set a book in Australia now and readers would come with me. It's not about the setting, it's about the story and the way you write.
Absolutely. And certainly your characters are so complex and so deep, and I think that you use detail incredibly well. Like, you know, it's all very fast paced and it's all, you know, quite high drama, particularly in the Cyrus and Evie books. But I think that the human elements are so well done. And I was going to say, like, speaking of nerves, When She Was Good is your 15th novel, right? Yeah. Is that right? 15. Yeah. So, you know, just asking for a friend who just happens to be in the grip of second book syndrome currently. Is there such a thing as 15th book syndrome? And, like, you know, do you still get nervous, or are you just like, well-oiled machine now?
I suffer from what, you know, is commonly called imposter syndrome. And so I have an agent who's been with me since, you know, even ghostwriting days. So we've been with me for 27 years, you know, this agent, and I still sign every book to Mark. We've filled them again. You know, this belief that every time I deliver a book, this is the book that's going to expose me as being a complete fraud that doesn't know what I'm doing.
Oh my God, that's very.
And I've just been lucky up until now. And so, but it's funny. I remember. I mean, you're going through a second book. I mean, in America, they often call it sophomore syndrome or second book syndrome, particularly if your first book has been really well received and you get this sort of, you know, what if that was a one-off? What if I've only got one book in me? What if, and that you put, and I remember when I delivered my second book, it was, and everyone seemed to like it. The sense of relief over the fact was, all right, okay, but if I stuff it up from now, at least I've got 2 good books behind me.
Oh, 100%. That's such a relief well, it's kind of a relief, but it's kind of scary that it doesn't quite ever go away.
Every
But
time
yes.
I turn to write, I liken it to, because I don't plot in advance, so it's like climbing Everest, and you can only see the rock face that you're climbing up. That's all you can see. You don't know how far it is to the top. You don't know where the end of the book is. You just keep climbing, and you think, you hope there's a top. You hope you reach the top. And so, and every book, when you start, you think, oh, I've got to do it all again. I've got to climb that bloody mountain.
Oh, and I don't know about you, but like having only done it once, this for me, this second draft, this second book, first draft, has been very difficult because I feel like writing the first one was so joyful. It was such a kind of a freedom, and it was so fun, and there was no pressure. And with this one, I'm just kind of, it is joyful, and I am having fun, but there's a lot about it that's very racked with those neuroses that you're speaking of.
I think one of the issues, and I think this is what sets the writers that have a long career, that will have a longer career apart from others, is that so many people, the first novel is years in the making because they're doing it in their spare time, and they get lots of time to think about it. And so really, even though they might not spend that much time writing, they get a lot of time to think about it. And then when they get that wonderful justification of that first book published and a contract to write another one, they think because they've got the vindication there that the second one will be easier to write. And I've got all this extra time also because I know that, the doubt isn't there, that people want this, they're waiting for this book. But a lot of writers don't realize how much that thinking time was important in that first book, how much. And so it's that my advice would be I know there's always pressure to get that second book out, to catch the wave and not leave it too long. But second books are really important because, it's got to be strong. You don't want to be, in this day and age, you don't want to deliver something you're not happy with. You've got to make sure you don't let them rush you, if you know what I mean. And I know there's deadlines and all that, but just say, they will wait. If you're not happy, they will wait, because it's your career and you want to follow up such a strong book with another strong book. You don't want to drop the ball now.
Thank you.
Well,
That's really, really great
advice. I think
it's
important to say to yourself, better a late book than a bad book.
Exactly.
It really does. And, the writers I have talked to who've had the easiest time with second books are writers whose first book took forever to sell. And so they started a second book while they were in that long waiting period. Yeah. And so there was less time pressure. Because
and it's also one of the reasons is often it's not the first book you write that's published. And people have got a couple of sort of novels that they've written and put aside in the bottom drawer, and it might be the third one they've written that gets published, but suddenly it's not that much more work for them to polish up and to make those first novels work. And so it's often the first book you write might be the second or third one that's published.
Well, that's very true. Although I have frequently asked writers who do that, oh, my first book, was so terrible, it's in a bottom drawer, and, no one will ever see it. And so I say to them, well, have you destroyed it? And so far, nobody has destroyed it, somehow or other. I don't know whether it's sentimental or, or what, but if you really truly don't ever want anyone to read it, you should, in fact, get rid of it. But it doesn't work that way.
The only sad thing I did say that, I mentioned losing Peter Temple, and he was working on a new novel, and Peter, I know for a fact, would have ordered that all of his papers and drafts be destroyed. And he would not have wanted that book published unless he was completely happy with it. And yet a partially finished Peter Temple would still be so much better than so many other books. And apparently he was about to deliver it to the publishers. So it was almost done, and yet we'll probably never ever see it. I'm hoping that his lovely, lovely wife hasn't destroyed it, but I know Peter would have wanted it destroyed.
This is so Jane Austen, this particular moment. We all sound like Cassandra, burning the papers and so forth, which is terrible. So I meant to mention, Anna and I talked about it, Michael, but there's Candace Fox writing a couple of books set up in Queensland, which is not the outback, it's remote, but very different geography and climate. And Sarah Bailey has written a couple of books. So I do think that there are, it's not just Jane Harper in the Outback, but there's a look at, I haven't seen anything. Have either of you run across a novelist writing in Western Australia, like in Perth?
Well, yeah, Dervla McTiernan, but she's
She
writing
doesn't.
in Ireland. Yeah, but she's writing from Western Australia.
But she doesn't set them in Western Australia,
No.
does she? I'm not sure that anything. I can't think of anything that's set in.
Well, I can think of a few, but probably not that have had big international. What's his name? Wish Wilson. There's a few Western Australian crime writers that I know are published and translated into a few different languages, but I don't know whether they're published in America. But you're right. I mean, the names we can roll off. I mean, people like Christian White is doing incredibly well. Sarah Bailey, as you mentioned. Emma Viskick is doing incredibly well. Candice
Pamari.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Brandy, JP.
Mark Brandy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's some astonishingly. I mean, I remember. It's funny. I still regard myself as being new, and everyone always referred to me as a veteran, and I feel as though I'm not a veteran. But when so many new and brilliant younger writers are coming through, I mean, it's really exciting. And I suppose that does make me a veteran if I'm one of the old timers.
It does feel like, in a lot of ways, publishing is it's such a slow moving beast, but it also feels at the moment, like you say, there are so many people coming up. There's so much new talent coming up. It's really exciting. I get quite get anxious wanting to read all the new releases. It's awesome. I think Australia is having and New Zealand having a really a bit of a heyday at the moment.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. There's a couple of amazing Tassie writers as well just come up as well.
It's a golden age, I think, right now. I mean, a lot of these people are breakthrough. And as you said, Barbara, it's very true. I mean, everyone looked after the Scandi Noir phenomenon, where would be the next breakthrough place, and we'd love to see it be Australia, New Zealand, and sort of Antipodean noir. It seems to be going that way, which is lovely. And that's also thanks to people like you who have been so supportive of Australian writers.
Well, my first trip to Australia, when I went into bookstores in Australia, every book on the shelf was American. Mm-hmm. And I might add, at spectacularly high prices. And part of the problem is because if there's one subject that I really do know, is the supply side of book selling and publishing. And, when books were shipping over from the UK to Australia on ships and so forth, it was really hard to keep the supply train going. But today, with electronic publishing, you can print books in different countries. We can have this conversation, even though it's Friday in Australia in the morning and I'm sitting here Thursday afternoon thinking about a drink and you guys are spilling coffee. But nonetheless, a lot of the barriers to international publishing were dissolving with the supply side. But what's now interesting is this pandemic has forced us all into learning technology that dissolves the barriers in terms of promoting and conversations. We would not have been having this last year at this time. We would not have been having this three-way conversation between Sydney and the Central Coast and Scottsdale easily.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't.
It's interesting because, even though my life sort of hasn't changed, this is the moment when normally, because the new book came out on July 28th, when she was good, and I would be touring. I'd be touring Australia and then heading overseas. And all that's changed. And you're absolutely right. And I'm due, because it's been a few years now, to do a tour in America. And I would have probably, if I'd done a tour in America, I would definitely come to Poison Pen. But it's changed. And I don't know whether, I said to my publisher the other day, I said, do you think you'll ever go back? When this is all over, will you go back to touring authors again? And they sort of said, we don't really know, because book sales have held up, mainly because people have been in lockdown. They've held up. It's one of the few businesses where publishers have actually, in bookshops, certainly in Australia, I can't speak for America, have done reasonably well and survived quite well during this. And and I just don't know whether they will invest. I think they'll have to invest in new writers touring, but I don't know whether they'll invest in touring more established writers.
I mean, I think the reach of some of these virtual events is just insane. I mean, obviously, it's been it was a big disappointment for me not to be able to do the tour that we had planned. But at the same time, I've done some of the most extraordinary things, as you were saying, Barbara, just like this would never have happened. And the fact that, you know, I can be chatting with Barbara last week and she can say, oh, you know, well, let's do it again next week. Let's you know, come and meet Michael. Yes, please. I would love that, you know, like, and it just happens. That's amazing. But also little things like, I mean, again, I was quite disappointed that I didn't get the bookshop launch, you know, the traditional launch that I've always seen other writers doing. But what we did instead, you know, the virtual platform that we had has got round to, you know, 20, 30 times more people than it would otherwise. And that's really amazing in terms of what it's all about, which is your book reaching its readers.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've had a lot of feedback when I've done events like this one, readers that have never been able to get to see me at a live event because they live too remotely or whatever, and who suddenly get the opportunity they've never had before, and they're sending messages saying, please don't stop, whatever happens, don't stop doing these sort of Zoom events, because, you know, this is our opportunity to hear writers speak. So no, you're right. I think this will remain, and it is, you know, it's that you do reach so many more people in an hour. Then it doesn't matter whether, you know, you could get 150 people in front of you at a live event, but you'll still reach so many more people when you do an event like this.
You know what? I think we'll end up with a combination, a blend. There is really no way to replace the energy in the room that comes from, I mean, you know, we hold amazing live events, right up until this whole thing started. And you can't replicate that on Zoom. You know, you don't have that energy. You don't have people able to meet the author, press the flash, take the photos, you know, create their own, because everybody's writing his own story anymore on social media and all of that. And so I think that we'll end up with both. I think that we'll still have live events, but I think that we will use this as a great way to connect in ways that weren't possible. And also, I might add, book discussion clubs, because, you know, we were always the most number of customers we've ever had in Arizona was like 30% of our customer base. We have always been a national and international bookstore. And my husband, who's doing the podcast that he's making of these, showed me the other day a list of the countries where people are listening, and there's like 37 countries are tuning into our podcast. And even if it's like one person from Belarus or one person from Vanuatu, you know, as compared to a large number, Australia is actually the second largest group of people listening to the podcast after the United States, which I think is fascinating. So, you know, as countries are getting more national, this is all going more global. It's a fascinating thing. It's cutting across.
Well. Yeah, this works well. I had to do an event here, which was just me talking to like a screen. And
was that the Dybbuk's chapter 1?
Yes.
Yeah,
and it's so hard, because normally if you're in front of a crowd, you tell a funny anecdote and you get the smiles or the laughter and you feed off that. But when you're just looking at yourself on the screen, and you don't know whether anyone's got that joke and I felt it was like watching, I know it's like watching the Tonight Show hosts in America, like Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, doing it from home with no studio audience. And so they did their opening monologues and they don't know whether they're getting it. You can see they struggle to begin with because they don't get any feedback.
That's right. That's right. And as somebody, certainly as somebody who's had a career on the stage, I really miss that. I find, you know, that energetical, is that even a word? But that exchange and that electricity in the room, even if you're just having a kind of a conversation and it's not so much of a performance. I've very much struggled with the idea of sitting down and talking to a screen. It hasn't been too bad, actually. I've not minded it too much, but I think it's quite draining. Do you know what I mean? Because you're kind of sending all your energy out into this black hole and not getting anything back. And I get very nervous as well because I don't really trust technology. So the whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, this is all going to go, you know.
It's like being in a theatre where they've got the audience gets plunged into darkness and the spotlight's on you on the stage. And you actually, because you can't see the audience anymore because the lights are so bright, you sort of have this, unless you get some laughter or something back, you think they could have all snuck out. And I could, because I
It's
can't.
really true. I think the most successful virtual events are ones like these, where you're actually having a conversation. I have tuned into a couple where it's just the author alone on the screen, and it's like a monologue. And it doesn't really interest me that much. So we've kept up this design of chatting back and forth as though we were doing it in the bookstore, or, you know, these kinds of talks we're not doing necessarily to Facebook Live simultaneously, in part because I haven't quite mastered that part of the technology. I have to go down to the store and have Patrick help me do it. But I'll eventually figure it out. But I do think that at least we achieve some interactivity amongst the three of us, you know, and so if we're enjoying ourselves, then I like to think that the audience will be enjoying it in the same way that if you're amusing yourself with your writing, if you're surprising yourself and making yourself laugh or scare yourself or whatever you're doing while you're writing your book, then you can be fairly sure that the reader reaction will be good.
I'm interested in Anna's background there. I'm thinking if I zoomed in, would I see the plot to your new novel on the wall there? Is that the outline?
No, but if I were to turn the computer that way, you would see it on the wall over there, yes. So that's why I keep it here. No, what I've got up here, this is, I've got things from the Safe Place. So this is a map that I drew of my setting. This is a timeline here. These are postcards that went out with some of the arcs, and publicity schedules here. And these are like little notes that I keep kind of written up around the wall. Like if I read an article, or if I hear somebody say something on a podcast or an interview or something that really resonates, I'll write it and put it on the wall as kind of like daily reminders about just things like pace and what what thrilling writing is, and you know, little reminders, so that when I'm sitting there and I'm stuck, I just look up and I go, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. It's cheesy, but yeah, it makes me feel good.
Absolutely great. Yeah, I love it.
I don't think it's cheating at all. I think every writer has his or her own creative process. You know, people, it's interesting that especially with live events, it's always the question that comes up. What's your writing process? You know, and it's even as granular as, do you write with a pen, or do you know, use it, whatever. Although some of that's going away because I think increasingly people are assuming that everybody is writing on a keyboard and not so much manually.
You know,
although I certainly know writers. Anne Perry still writes by hand. P.D. James, till she stopped writing, wrote everything by hand and had it. Paul,
you write by hand?
Yeah, I do.
Do you? Do you?
In a big bound book, and so it takes me away from the internet. And the internet is, as you know, the greatest tool ever invented for writers, and also the greatest waste of time ever invented for writers. And so if I need to get away from the internet, I'll take a big sort of book down to a cafe and I'll sit right longhand. I'm the weird writer that everyone in my community knows who I am, but they know not to interrupt me. And
that just blows my mind, just because I don't know, I've tried it, and I've got, you know, stacks and stacks of notebooks. I write all my ideas and my thoughts. It's like I kind of journal, you know, and all my research goes longhand. I've got loads and loads of notebooks, but when it comes to actually writing the scene, I find it so helpful to see it on the, you know, the computer screen, on the page. I don't know, like, I think that it helps me visually to see it almost kind of mapped. Do you know what I mean? Like almost like a picture. How does it look? I feel like it's really helpful to see those black and white words coming out on the screen. It's not helpful for me to see it in longhand because it just...
Yeah, I mean, because I'll write maybe 4 days longhand and then spend the 5th day putting it all on screen. I won't leave it too long before I put it on screen, because my handwriting's so appalling, I won't be able to read my own handwriting back. But what I find, particularly on dialogue, when you write longhand, there's something about it creates this incredible spark. And maybe because like one of the things Graham Greene once said was that putting words on the page is the very last part of the writing process. All the really important stuff has been done subconsciously before you put the words down.
So interesting, which is maybe what my journaling is.
Exactly. And so I find when I'm writing dialogue, it actually sparkles and it gets bang, bang, bang when I'm doing it longhand. Fast, interesting. More so. But once you, I mean, screen's the only place you can cut and paste and put around and polish and all of that. But I just find longhand sort of helps with that first.
Well, I mean, you're not the only one. I heard James Patterson writes longhand on a yellow legal pad and then gets an assistant to transcribe it all, like to not transcribe it, you know, to put it all on the computer for him.
Well, we all work differently. I work back and forth all day long between, you know, writing in Word and doing emails and so forth. I find that even translating something from an email into a Word document or writing it in Word and then putting it into email, that I see it differently.
Oh, no.
It's still on screen, but
I do all my editing. I do all my editing on paper in terms of once I finish the first draft, each draft after that I print out.
I do too.
It's because it's so, and it's amazing how you'll change something when you read it on paper, and you'll put it back on screen, and you'll say that doesn't look right, and you want to write it differently, as you say, Barbara. It just doesn't look right on screen, but it looks right on paper, and I don't know why that is, but it.
Well, aren't we lucky that we have all this technology, you know, that we're not sitting here either with a quill pen or banging away on an old typewriter?
Oh, I know. And very cool that we can integrate them both as well. Like I do the same, Michael. I did the same. I speak about it like I've written 15 books. I really haven't. I've written one. But it was the same process. You know, I print them all out and then you know, what you see on the paper is very different, and you know, the notes that you make, and then again when you put it, you know, and switching between the two, I think, you know, reveals so much more. Yeah.
Well, it's all how our brain works. Then, you know, an older brain like mine, I've had to explain to publishers that I can't read digital galleys. That I can't. My brain does not absorb a digital galley. So if I'm going to be talking to an author, I have to have a reading copy in order for me to retain it. You know, I just can't remember it. And I think brains are hardwiring differently a little bit with younger people using more technology. And so it's all kind of what we're used to. You know, we've been sitting here for an hour. Can you imagine that? Probably you're getting restless. I've always found at the bookstore that we call it butts and seats, that people start squirming as you're coming up on the hour because they've been in that chair.
You got to remember, Barbara, that I spend 8 hours a day sitting on a chair.
Listen, this has been so much fun.
If I was talking to you, I'd be writing.
100%, yes.
I'm delighted that you two have had a chance to meet and that we've had a chance to do this together. I have a final question. Anna, you've told us what you're working on, but the one final question I have for Michael is, now that When She Was Good has published, what are you working on now?
I'm working on a standalone. I will go back to Evie and Cyrus again, but I'm working on a standalone about a young policewoman who rescues it's really about domestic violence. She rescues a woman from a violent sort of relationship, but the perpetrator is actually a very senior police officer, and it turns this policewoman's career upside down because of, and so it's it's going to be called When You Are Mine.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Have you, Michael, have you read Jess Hill's See What You Made Me Do?
No, I've but it's on my bedside table to read, because it is about that whole domestic violence.
Oh, I mean, it's so harrowing, but so important. I'm listening to the audiobook at the moment, and you can hear, as she's reading it, you know, that you can hear the emotion in her voice, and you can hear how shocking it is. I feel like there's a lot of material coming out, not just around domestic abuse, but around a lot of very important kind of social issues that are peeling back layers of what we thought we understood about things, and showing them in new lights. And hers is one of those. I think you'll
yeah, no, it's one of those ones I want to read because of the research. I've been sort of researching all about sort of stalkers and manipulative men and
but it's very now, it's very of the moment, because I think we're realizing quite a few things about, you know, kind of gender roles and power struggles and stuff that we maybe didn't understand before. So it's,
and it's a bit like, I think to a degree, I mean, when she was good, I don't know, I mean, I think, Barbara, you might have referenced it in an email to me, Jeffrey Epstein, the Jeffrey Epstein case, because it's funny, in 1992, I wrote the very first article about Jeffrey Epstein. I was actually writing an article about Ghislaine Maxwell and the new man in the life. And I revealed what a mysterious figure Jeffrey Epstein was. And when the whole Epstein case sort of blew up in America, I was getting phone calls from Vanity Fair and the New York Times and Washington Post, and all wanted to talk to me. And my initial reaction was, who? I'd completely forgotten, because I thought I was really writing about Ghislaine Maxwell rather than Epstein. But the story was also basically about Epstein and this new man, and I'd completely forgotten. But it's sort of, it's sort of the seed of the idea behind When She Was Good, in terms of the sort of powerful men, abusive men, and how the power they have to make themselves safe and to avoid detection, to avoid prosecution, and all of that is what sort of bound up in When She Was Good. And it very much, the Epstein, I'm not saying he did this, I never use the word, Epstein never inspires anyone, but it sort of fell at a time, that book comes out at a time where I think it just resonates a little more because of the whole Jeffrey Epstein sort of scandal.
absolutely.
I agree with you. I thought that, you know, his shadow was over this book. And isn't it interesting that you can write a book without knowing in advance that it will publish at a moment when it takes on a greater significance than it might, just because of events in the world. I often think, you know, readers do not necessarily understand how long it takes to write a book and get it published. And so they tend to think of it as journalism, you know, where, oh, look, you know, here was Jeffrey, so Michael has written a book that leaps upon that in a few months.
And a classic example of that is, I don't know whether you noted, when you read When She Was Good, it opens up and it says, I think it opens up in May 2020.
Yeah, I did read that.
I wrote this book before the whole pandemic, COVID. And of course, I said it in May 2020. And there's no reference when you read the book about the pandemic, because, I mean, I wrote it before anyone knew this was going to happen. And I've had to, in the acknowledgements, just sort of explain to readers that, look, you know, this is what happened. The book was edited and done and dusted before this all blew up. And you just have to accept the fact that, try to get past it, you know, and don't attack me for not mentioning the pandemic. You know?
Well, I think it's a welcome relief for me, to be honest. It's nice to escape. Admittedly, it's not a nice world that you've put me in with that book, but you know, it's nice to escape our current situation at the minute.
Well, I agree, and I don't think that it's possible to write really about the pandemic, Michael, because we have no idea what its effects will be or how it will come out. So why would you want to write a book that's just speculation, more so than...
Exactly. I mean, I'm finding that now. The book I'm writing for next year, the one I mentioned I'm writing, it will be set in 2021, and I'm referencing now, but I don't know whether what I'm referencing, you know, will be in lockdown or out of lockdown. I refer to events during the lockdown, but for all we know, there will still be lockdowns then. I mean,
that's right.
So maybe I got to change the dates on these things and write something in the past.
I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be a challenge for all writers of fiction. In any case, let me say, I hope you both stay well. Try it again.
Thank
both
you.
Stay safe and be well. And I will look forward to talking to you again. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much for this, and so lovely to meet you, Michael. Thanks so much.
You too, and lovely to meet you. Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome. Bye.